Welcome to Teen Talk, Navigating Teen Challenging Behavior. I am Pei Yi. I'm a parenting and teen challenging behavior specialist at Rainbow Parenting Practice. Over the last 30 years, I've worked with children, teenagers, and then families with various complex needs across different settings. But it is my personal story, being a troubled teenager, that led me to the creation of my innovative parenting method, Thriving Together Parenting Method. It can help you and your team to have a more loving, respect-driven relationship and the happiness and harmony in your family home in 90 days. No matter what challenging behavior it is, how challenging it has been, and for however long your family has been in a difficult place. Many families came to me when they were in crisis or at breaking point. My TTP method is the secret to their transformative family lives. It can be yours too. I am thrilled for you to be here, and that possibly means you are a successful but stressed out parent who is managing a very demanding job but struggling to know what to do and how to help your troubled teen who is stuck in patterns of challenging behavior. You're fed up with trying everything but nothing works. You're looking for solutions yesterday and are determined to do whatever it takes to help your teen and family thrive. At Teen Talk, Navigating Teen Challenging Behavior, I will share all the insights I've learned from working with families and their teenagers over the years. I will not hold back. Let's dive in. Hi, this is Pei Yi. Welcome to our show today. And we have a special guest today, and is also one of my very close friends. I'm so glad to have her on the show today. But before I introduce her, let me introduce her as an informal title. She's actually Belle's mama. So it's really nice to have her. And actually, officially, professionally, she is Dr. Nikki Eriksen, who is a child and adolescent psychotherapist who is going to join us to have a discussion of the cards today. So welcome, Nikki. But I'm going to let Nikki, Belle's mama, introduce herself before we start.
Hi there, Pei and everybody. Well, yes, as Pei said, I'm Dr. Nikki in my work life. I've worked with children and adolescents all my working life, really. Mostly when I was younger as a teacher, working with children with additional support needs. And then gradually, and often with a lot of challenging behaviours, and working with their parents and assessing them and trying to help. And that led me more and more to, I suppose, get more training and education about child development and how the personality develops in children and adolescents, and really to think about children and family relationships all through the life cycle. So that's my kind of work hat and development. But yes, obviously I'm Belle's mum and Maya's mum.
Yeah, Belle was here with us last time.
Two daughters who are, well, one is a young adult and one's, I suppose, in the middle to later stages now of adolescence. And I don't think you can ever be an expert as a mother, but you can try your best and be as informed a mum as you can. So I suppose my work has helped me to try and be an informed mum, but by no means meant I could solve all the challenges of being a parent all the time. So
I know it's hard, isn't it? Because it became so subjective, and it's really hard to stay objective when you're in that position parenting your two teenage daughters back then, and there's so many emotions coming up, so it's hard.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So Nikki and I used to train together in the preclinical course that was like psychological thinking skills with working with well, gosh, I already forgot.
Therapeutic skills for working with children and young people. We did that postgraduate diploma together, didn't we?
We did. And then Nikki went on to do the doctorate and I went on to do something else. And now I'm training as a family therapist. But we still get to talk a lot about Freud, Melody Klein, and all these things. So it'll be really interesting to have Nikki's input and thoughts on some of the topics we're going to speak today. So Nikki, these cards, I don't know, as I said to you earlier, these are the cards we'll be picking from. But given you're a guest, I will shuffle. So usually I shuffle and then you tell me to stop. And the first card will be the cards we'll be speaking about today. How does that
Okay.
sound?
Yeah,
Right.
good.
So just tell me when to stop.
Oh, keep shuffling, keep
Right?
shuffling.
I like a
Yeah.
professional poker.
Okay, now stop to decide our destiny, what we're going to speak about.
Oh, right. Okay. Okay. Oh, this is going to be interesting. Right. This one, I don't know if you can see the cards, right? So it's a wee boy. It's a teenage boy.
Okay. Yeah,
Basically, what it say is full of uncried tears.
he's full of uncried tears.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, where does your mind take you to? This is where Belle and I always like, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I suppose that's interesting that it's a boy, I suppose, that's chosen to represent that particular idea, because of course a boy or a female or a male could be full of uncried tears. But it does make me think about people who internalize their distress,
Mm,
who can't express it outwardly. And we tend to think of the person crying and sort of vocalizing their pain, as perhaps the first person you go to, but actually it's a bit like when they teach you in first aid, isn't it? That actually sometimes it's the person who's silent that you have to think about or worry about. And I think that can be an issue for people worrying about boys in particular, because we hear so much about boys and young men who people thought were okay and then discover that they weren't, sometimes really tragically. So yeah, I suppose it's the idea of how to help somebody express their tears rather than feeling they can't cry. And maybe society sending a message to boys in particular that there's something wrong with crying.
Actually, you know what? Interesting enough, I think Belle and I briefly touched upon this in one of the episodes. We talk so much, I don't really remember the discussion, but I think this is like so interesting because like you say, it's a boy. It's not a girl like who has full of uncried tears. But I like what you said about how do we help somebody to express their struggles.
Yeah, and to be vulnerable. And actually quite often the last thing we want to feel is vulnerable. And our
Yeah, tell us
children
more about that, Nikki. Tell us about that, because all of us don't want to be vulnerable. Even the children we work with I mean, in my past life, in present life too, they don't want to be vulnerable. What do you think that is about?
I guess partly it's human nature to defend against pain. But it's also partly what we learn from people around us. If in our earliest experiences somebody, I mean, if you're thinking psychoanalytically, how we think about really early development, how our very first tears were received by the people that were caring for us. Because obviously all infants are born helpless, and the way they express their needs is often through tears and crying. Very, very powerfully they do that, and it can be quite hard to bear, hearing the sort of pain and suffering of a baby. So I suppose our own first experiences of whether our pain can be received and understood by our carers ultimately is going to set the tone for whether we can, you know, how we feel about our own vulnerable feelings, how safe we feel when we're vulnerable.
Wow.
But saying that, even a baby that's been well held and looked after, you know, may still go on to grow up to be a child or young adult that wants to move away from their experiences of emotional suffering. I think it is part of human nature to avoid those painful feelings.
Wow, Nikki, I really miss these conversations. Forget about family therapy. Think about, I love this. It's so good, you know. And I suppose you made me think about, you know, you're right, you know, in terms of that vulnerability and how that pain was experienced. And as children grow, their experience will continue to change.
Yeah.
You know, by the people surrounded, by the people who are caring for them. And that
Yes.
might actually contribute to how they see vulnerabilities. And I'm thinking about the cultural I'm not thinking about psychology, I'm thinking about the cultural context of for some cultures.
Yeah.
You're just not to show vulnerability, just tough. They're just like, please toughen up. Why are you doing this? You know, and it's quite fascinating how each country and culture has different interpretation of vulnerabilities.
Yes, yeah, and how much cultural acceptance there is of expressing that, sharing with others. But I mean, I was going to say, you know, I'm talking about the theory of how if an infant was to receive, you know, the most loving, emotionally containing, holding, kind of caring love for its suffering, but the reality is that we don't have perfect infants and perfect mothers and perfect carers. So actually we all experience times, I think, when our parents were not happy with us crying, who did plead for us to stop crying, or even if they didn't say it out loud, were willing us to not show tears. And as a mother, I can say myself, it can be so painful to hear your own child crying, that if you're tired and emotional yourself, you can definitely want to tell your child, you know, please stop crying. I have definitely done that myself, much as I don't like to admit that professionally, but as a mother, we're human, and
it's hard, isn't it? No, let me think about my own early experience, because my mom said I was a crying baby. I cried a lot. And
right.
yeah, and then maybe that's why I like grew up. I just didn't want to be vulnerable whatsoever. And I had to learn to be vulnerable. And there's also the cultural context. It's tough up, hey. There's no such thing as stress. You know, you just have to soldier on. But my mom was saying I was a crying baby. And the time, I mean, I was actually in nursery for a very long time. And then she said I cry all the time. But I think because she was building her business with that, and they also have so many caring responsibilities for the extended families, and it's really hard to have a baby or have a toddler who just wanted mommy's attention all the time, when emotionally she has so much to contend with, you know. But like you say, being a mom is not easy, you know, and we are all human. But that does make me think. I have a question though for the audience. So you mentioned earlier, like, you know, some people or teenagers, I mean, like we're focusing on teenagers, internalize the difficulties and struggles. And some teenagers externalize them, right? They trash house, they engage in antisocial behavior, this thing. So what makes them internalize or externalize their
What
feelings?
makes somebody an internalizer
Yeah.
or an externalizer? That's a really complex question, isn't it? Because partly you know, that everybody's personality and tendency is different from when they're a baby.
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously nurture, nature, you know, it's how that intersects with how you're received in your environment.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm thinking you were saying about you, Pei, you know, you being described as someone who cried a lot as a baby,
Mm-hmm.
but you're such an expressive person.
Mm-hmm.
So as a complete, you know, at first impression, I would quite quickly think, oh, well, I would think Pei would tend to externalize her emotions.
Mm-hmm.
So I could imagine you being quite an externalizing adolescent, you know, and for myself, I probably was somebody who, you know, showed my emotions quite strongly, but I think that can change.
Mm-hmm.
It is complex. So you can be, you know, you could be generally quite an extrovert person
Mm-hmm.
and still internalize a lot of your difficult emotions. So it's not as simple as, you know, introverts internalize, extroverts externalize. It's also feeling that I suppose in order to externalize feelings, maybe you have to feel that there's an environment or a person interested in listening or strong enough to
Mm-hmm.
cope with you expressing your feelings.
Mm-hmm. But if you think about it, I see like the teenagers I work with, I mean, we see a lot of their feelings in their behavior.
Yeah,
But then there are also some teenagers, they they just don't talk and they don't share things with the family, with the parents. So then I think it's easier to spot difficulties or help teenagers when they actually externalize their feelings, because you can so clearly see, okay, he's taking drug or he's drinking alcohol or he's running away from home. There's something bothering this kid, right? Or this
yeah,
young person. Whereas somebody could be internalize those feelings and they might be secretly cutting themselves,
yes,
or doing things that people don't know and then just held it inside. I think they're quite
yeah,
difficult for parents to navigate, really.
yeah. And I think, you know, parents with a very externalizing teenager are going to tell you how extremely challenging that is. But actually, if you then get an experience of your child not telling you about something,
Mm-hmm.
and actually when you find out it's really serious how they're feeling,
Mm-hmm.
um, either through that might manifest itself through self-harm, or, you know, worst case scenario, I suppose, and it's increasingly common that adolescents do take overdoses, don't they?
Yeah.
Quite seemingly out of the blue,
Or depression.
uh, or depression. I think the internalizing child, in some ways, it's more, it's much scarier to think that you don't know what's going on with your child and they can't really tell you,
Mm-hmm.
even if you are trying to listen and be available, that sometimes they can't express in words anyway.
So what can the teenagers and parents do in this time, in time like this? There's a lot of internal struggles, there's a lot of feelings, but they can't express themselves, and parents don't have a way into how their feelings. What can parents and teenagers do? How do you navigate this?
Oof. Well, obviously it's going to be different according to each circumstance, but
Mhm.
obviously that there's also some general things, I suppose. I'm thinking about um, I'm thinking about in terms of what parents can do. I think their self-care, looking after themselves
Mhm.
and their own mental health, which is really, you know, there's a strain of being a parent when your child is unwell or depressed.
Mhm.
Um, quite quickly can take a toll on a parent in a way that makes it a bit of a negative vicious cycle, because um, uh, you know, if the parent's not is getting burnt out or feeling awful themselves, it's going to be harder for them to stay available to their child. Acceptance, I suppose, is really key. Trying to accept and stay patient with whatever it is that your child or adolescent is feeling. Try not to react. Try not to overreact.
It's like, I like the acceptance part, you know, it's like be there and accept whatever way your teenage children are showing themselves to you. And I always remember this thing. It's like when people are struggling with the stuff, don't ask them to do things to be better or feel better, but be there for them. And what do you think about this? Because
I think it's really important, but I think there's, you know, it's all very well to say accept and be there, but obviously you're wanting a situation to move on. You don't want a young person to remain, your child to remain stuck. So there's a balance of acceptance, but also I suppose trying to, you know, keep motivation up, keep routines going. I mean, the basics obviously so important: sleeping, eating, drinking, the physical basics, because young people can quite easily tip into some you know, really bad routines these days with devices, and if they're depressed, kind of escape from it by messing with their sleep routines and staying up all night on devices and kind of shutting out reality, I suppose. So yeah, I think acceptance, but with boundaries as well. And I think parents have to stay hopeful that things can change, that they will change, but maybe not as quickly as you hope initially. That if, you know, things can go on for quite a while for adolescents once they become if they're going through something, it can last a while.
Yeah, it could be like a forever thing, forever journey.
Well, I think that's what's scary, is because it can feel like it's going to be forever, but of course it isn't.
Yeah.
But if your child that seemed all happy and all singing, all dancing, and then suddenly in adolescence you see a different side, if you feel like they really change personality, it can feel like, am I ever going to get my happy-go-lucky, you know, my happy child back again? It can feel like it's going to be forever.
Yeah, it is quite a worrying phase for parents, isn't it? I actually I was working with this parent, and he told me the other day, I was so angry because, and you know, they're going through some difficulties, and their friends, family also went through some difficulties with their teenager, and they was like, you know what, this is really normal. Wait till they're 30. Everything will be resolved because their teenagers, when they were 30, is gone. I'm like, oh my God, worst advice ever. It's like,
when they're 30, as in 30.
As 30, yes. It's like, wait till they're 30. They will just write this through. I'm like, oh my God, worst advice ever. Don't tell parents to wait till they're 30. There's so many missed opportunities. Like you say, acceptance with boundaries are things we can help teenagers and parents to navigate this part of the journey.
Yeah.
You know, so I'm thinking about from a teenager's side, what can they do? Oh, let me ask you this question first before we answer this question. So see, what are some of the challenges like teenagers are facing, you know, that you have come across in your world?
Well, I suppose in my work world, I work in the NHS, and so I do work with a lot of children who don't have a huge amount of resources, might not be living in particularly safe neighborhoods. There can be bullying at school. They can have educational challenges and feel that they can't learn at school.
Mm-hmm.
They can feel very angry. There's huge amounts of challenges, and so I don't know if there's specific things that you want to think about, or.
No, I'm just thinking about in general. Like, I mean, teenagers already going through this transition, being a teenagers, right? So, like, their own development, their brain development, their emotional development, all this development they're going through, sexuality, identity, all these things.
Yeah.
But I think there's also external circumstances that may make some teenagers more receptible to some particular challenges or mental health difficulties, or like will require, CAMS input. I'm just curious. There's no particular thing.
No, yeah, there's so many different factors that can. Loss is a big thing. If there's been big family losses,
Yeah. Or the generational trauma.
Yeah, if there's been a history of mental health difficulties in the family.
Abuse.
Yeah, in some situations, emotional abuse or sexual abuse historically in families.
Domestic violence.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or parental drug use issues and mental health.
Yeah.
This
I mean, that's very, very common. Obviously, I work partly with the looked after population, children in care. So parental mental ill health, substance misuse, domestic violence are big factors in those children's lives.
Yeah. So it's just thinking about the teenagers already going through teenage transition and this phase with internal struggles, and then the external environment is like you said earlier on the nurture part. Is challenging, and it makes even more difficult to navigate those feelings and express those feelings, I suppose.
Yeah.
It's like, how do you make sense?
How do you make sense? I think with each, and you were asking earlier about how can you help in general terms, and I was thinking, what do I actually do if I'm listening to my own child, or if I'm listening to children at work? Probably what I actually do that helps them maybe the most is really listen to their version of how their experience of how things are feeling. That's really key, and not to rush in and challenge that or reassure them. And that's not to say that you don't do that in very careful ways, but the main thing is to allow them to talk about whatever is on their mind, and express how they're feeling. And I think probably first and foremost, validate that. And I think as parents, it can be quite hard to do that. It's probably easier professionally to really give someone space to say how angry they are, or how lonely they feel, or to just not even feel they can speak because they're just speechless about how awful they're feeling. So that's just one thing to do that professionally. But if it's your own child, I think we're more inclined to want to step in and challenge it before we've validated it. Whereas I think we do need to challenge young people's version of reality, but I think that's probably the skill, is in really accepting, even if it's distorted, that what they're experiencing is their valid experience.
Yeah, it's their It's like you can't refute anybody's feelings because that's their experience of feelings.
Yeah.
What you just say reminds me of, like, okay, I have actually two questions. So first question, have you actually had any children or young people come to your therapeutic room but say nothing?
Yeah, that's
Mm.
quite, that's uh
So how do
that's
you, mm,
sometimes one of the big difficulties for young people, is that they can't access words to think about their feelings or to express their feelings. So yeah, I have had people come and be silent for long periods.
so what do you
Uh,
do in those situations?
um, is in those situations try to show that you're actively listening to the silence, I suppose.
Oh, and
Notice it. So you would be saying, what you notice about how they're being, that they are feeling very quiet,
mm-mm.
and be curious about it, wondering what might be making it feel so difficult to speak, what might be so painful that can't even be voiced, and using your observations of their body language and what you're picking up non-verbally.
Mhm.
And so that's what you would do in therapy, but also with your own child, I think, rather than expect them to know what's going on, because we humans don't know what's going on with their emotions half the time. So especially children,
Mhm.
is to use your, you know, to sit back and look at their breathing, look at the way that they look tense, do they look angry, and sort of speculate, oh, I wonder if you're feeling,
See, that's really
yeah,
helpful. That's the reason I was asking you, Nikki, because I feel like the parents can definitely benefit from using those, more those techniques. And when their teenage children are not speaking to
yeah.
them. Mm-mm.
But I mean, that has to go with a public health warning if you're a child and adolescent psychotherapist, because if you use those words with your children and you're a professional therapist, they're going to say, you're not my therapist. So you have to be careful. You have to be casual and make sure that you're not. You can't be like in therapist mode with your child. But yeah, it's
Yeah,
still
but
the same thing.
yeah, and they will find their own tone and wording. My husband told me the other day the same thing. I was speaking to him and say, "You're not my family therapist. I'm not, I'm not speaking to you about this. I'd rather speak to someone else." I'm like, "What? I was just asking you as your wife."
Yeah,
It's interesting. Okay, then my second question, and those are really helpful strategies. I think parents, like, I can say this largely, a lot of parents I work with really struggle to stay connected with their teenagers' feelings,
yeah,
because they don't talk and they don't want to talk to them because why would I trust you with my darkest thoughts or most vulnerable thoughts when I know you could be doing saying XYZ. But then,
yeah,
in my systemic learning, we have been speaking about actually sometimes silence is protection. It could be protective. What are your
yeah.
thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think that is absolutely spot on, actually.
Hmm.
And when I think straight away, young people come to mind, and actually the most silent ones were probably the one with the most um, severest experiences of abuse, I would say.
Hmm.
Because it's a protective habit. I think a young child will
Hmm.
take on, is to become very silent and withdrawn if
Hmm.
a situation's intolerable. But so that's in the extreme. But yeah, I think it's quite a common strategy to to
Hmm.
to use silence to protect yourself.
Or others, maybe.
Yeah, it makes me think about, no comment in a
The
like
crime scene,
as
crime
a
field.
protective. Yeah, no comment, no comment. And I think children, they bring that into therapy. No comment, because if I say anything, you might use it against me, or how do I know I can trust you with what I'm feeling?
Yeah, or am I gonna make someone in trouble? Am I gonna cause trouble for someone else if I tell you all these things?
Yeah,
Oh, it's really not easy being a teenager, and it's also equally not easy being a parent.
no. And the
Mm.
other thing is that, like you made the important point, I think you said there, yeah, so you might think, well, why has my child got to protect themselves? What, I'm their mother. Why should they protect themselves from me? Why can't they just tell me their feelings? Um, but then there's another thing kicking in adolescence, which is, a natural uh, need for privacy.
Mm.
And you don't want to tell your parent everything, because you're taking your own risks and developing your own relationships. You don't want your parents running commentary on everything.
Mhm.
So you might be protecting yourself from nothing sinister, nothing more sinister than parental interference.
Yeah, and if you think about it, wanting autonomy and privacy is actually a healthy development,
Yeah.
you
So
know.
I can think of lots of children that are reluctant to tell their parents, particularly that things like bullying. That's an obvious one,
Hmm.
because they fear that their parents will dive in and start interfering in ways that will make the situation worse.
Mm. Interesting. But why wouldn't they want things to get better then? Because clearly, I mean, bullying is really serious and could be part of the uncried tears. They just don't have anywhere to speak to. Actually, I've worked with a lot of teenagers drop out of school or not going to school because being bullied.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
why don't I suppose my curiosity is why wouldn't the teenagers want their parents to intervene when they're actually their safety is actually is a concern.
Um, that's probably very complicated, but I think quite often you hear children say, um, it's because of this the social mobbing that happens, that if you let people know you're being victimized, actually it can get worse.
Yeah.
That's their experience, is that, and I work with young people in schools where they tell me that if you use that word, "Oh, I'm being bullied by someone," and you're not really, but you've used it, or the other young person doesn't perceive what they're doing to be bullying, then you're seen as a, what's the word that they use? As though you have, what do they call it?
Like you grass someone up.
Yeah, so but I think in Scotland where we are, the word is different. It's
Like,
not graft. It's like, I can't remember, but if you tell anyway, that you will be punished even more.
okay. Let me ask my husband later.
But I also think it's because young people want to take control
Mm-mm.
themselves.
Mm-mm.
So they're probably quite often in a bullying situation, hoping that they can try and control the situation without needing adult interference.
Mm-mm. Yeah. But I was thinking along with what you're saying earlier is like if I tell somebody things will get worse for me and actually I can probably tolerate being bullied just now and state the status quo because this is the only
Yeah,
thing they can do to me.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Mm-mm. But then that requires some like a psychoeducational for the teenagers to think about, the consequential thinking, I suppose, the pros and cons for telling and not telling. And there are always
yeah,
ways the professionals, the teachers, the people in school, or the teenagers themselves can do to keep themselves safe.
yeah.
So, but I can't believe it's been like 45 minutes, Nikki.
But I think if you think bullying is the issue and
Mm-mm.
you want your child to feel able to talk to you about it, then that's a big trust issue between you and your child,
Mm-hmm.
that you aren't going to jump in, that they won't lose control completely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That they'll have some say in what you do and how you handle it.
It's like collaboration, isn't it? And I suppose that's the thing we need to encourage the parents to think about is that yes, your teenager are still your children, but they are growing into their own person, have their own minds and thoughts
Yeah,
and feelings. So things that affecting their life, I think it's worth speaking to them about and get their views
yes,
as to what they think would be the best way forward. And may not always be the best way forward, but I think that conversation and negotiation and is really important because you're also teaching your teenager about your thought process and what could
yeah,
possibly happen from that. So it's quite
yeah,
beneficial. But that does make me think though, this like the bullying, all these things does add on to a lot of the uncried tears things, like when we first bought the car, there's so many things could lead to so many tears.
yeah,
But it's like you say, where can these tears go when you can't cry?
yeah,
Mm-mm.
yeah. Yes, you might be being bullied, but it might be a protective thing not to cry in that situation,
Hmm.
because they say never bleed in front of sharks.
Yeah.
Don't know that you're weak when people are uh, likely to victimize you for it. So
Mm.
it can be a survival strategy not to show that weakness, I suppose.
Absolutely. Oh, Nikki, I really enjoy our chat today. And although our card is about like full of uncried tears, I think we touch a lot around the subjects, whether it's about the babies and early, experience and vulnerabilities, about internalize it, teenagers internalize or externalize their feelings and the mental health side of things, the external factors that contributing to all these uncried tears. So there's actually, and then you also gave amazing strategies how parents can navigate the time when their teenagers are not telling them things and what the parents need to do. Oh, your cat's so cute. My cat is not here. Like what parents can do to support themselves and their teenagers through this journey. And I suppose, Belle and I always will have a curiosity for the parents or the teenagers. And I wonder, just before our show finishes, if you have any particular curiosity you want to encourage the parents or the teenagers on the very subject we spoke about.
Um, yeah, I think it links to what I was saying earlier about really trying to make space to listen and
Mhm.
use your imagination. That's the thing. I think it's so hard for us when we get older to really remember back to being 9 years old, 11 years old, 14 years old, and just yeah, just really be curious. You don't know it all
Mm-mm.
as to how your child's feeling now. You can draw on your own experience, but really be curious about how they're feeling, and maybe share a bit of your own experience. I think
Mm.
I think showing, without sounding like, oh yes, I was a teenager, or I know all about this and how it feels, but I think showing willingness to reflect back on your own childhood,
Mhm.
um, or say, oh yeah, I was bullied at school, I remember this, and that can be really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. But
Or I remember getting, drunk and making a fool of myself, or whatever it is that's going to help your child feel less ashamed,
mhm.
to know that you've done something and survived it, and learned from it.
Yeah, and see where you are today. That episode of the life, that phase of life didn't determine who you are. Do you
Yeah,
know?
I think
Mm-mm.
some parents don't think it's appropriate to share their own mistakes,
Mm-mm.
but I personally disagree with that. I think it can be really helpful to be honest with your child about some of your own teenage messings up
Yeah,
that you
and
did.
I suppose for me, it's how you share the information, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's less about what you share, it's how you share that piece of information that is age appropriate and is
Yeah.
helpful for your teenage children.
Yeah, and the reason you're doing it is to
Yeah.
try to help them to
Yeah.
feel it's okay to talk.
Absolutely. And I may be through there, so okay. And that really helps. I don't think my
Yeah.
parents actually share their teenage experience with me. That's
No,
such
I think it's
so.
quite unusual.
Mm-mm.
Quite unusual. I mean, you wouldn't do it in the heat of the moment, I
Mm-mm.
suppose. Let me talk about my experience. But maybe when you're, reflecting a bit later or
Mm-mm. Yeah, that's really helpful. I suppose then I'm the opposite of your curiosity. Nikki, I want to encourage the parents to be curious, no, to be curious about why they stop being curious. Because I feel like sometimes, like you mentioned family life cycle, and I feel like sometimes the parents do get stuck in the family stage of a family life cycle. They think their children, it's like I heard this very often. My teenage children become so selfish, they're so self-centered, and I lost my wee girl and wee boy who used to be so sweet and now is just so rude. And I think
yeah.
that they're stuck in that cycle. Is my child is still 9 year old, still 5 year old, still so sweet, and then struggle to move on to the new stage and age with their teenage children. And I think
Yeah.
that sometimes can create a lot of conflict because if your mind keeps stuck at like, oh, he used to be such a nice wee boy, and now he's like this terrible teenager.
Yeah, well, some people get stuck even earlier than that,
Yeah.
and they love their babies. And when the baby becomes a toddler and is challenging, they struggle with that developmental step.
Absolutely.
Um,
So maybe my curiosity is the parents to be curious about which family life cycle they are in just now, if they're
yeah.
stuck, you know?
Mm,
Because their teenager need the parents to move on in the journey with them because the teenagers are moving on. They already
yeah.
move on to the next life cycle. Is I want
Yeah.
independence, I'm leaving
But
home, and all these
well,
things.
it's so confusing though, keeping up with adolescents, because one day they can present like they want to be a baby forever and cuddle up in their bed and have food and drink brought to them forever. And the next day they can be telling you, why should they tell you what time they're coming home? They're perfectly capable. They're 16 now, so it's you're dealing with a toddler one minute, a baby the next, and an 18-year-old trapped in a 15-year-old's body,
Yeah,
the next minute. So we're at all these life stages are in all of us.
absolutely. And then quote, what is that? As a male client, you have to work through the stages and positions across our life.
Yeah.
But I love that what you mentioned is like could be a toddler and then the next one is a 19-year-old. Just you don't tell me what I do. I do what I do.
Yeah.
But that's the joy and the very unique journey of being a parent to teenagers.
Yes. Yes.
You only get this once, so make it a good one for your teenagers and for yourself. You know.
Yeah.
But thank you, Nikki, for coming to the show. It has been such a privilege to be able to speak to you about this. And I hope I trust the audience will find this episode really helpful.
Thanks, P. Thank you for inviting me on, as Belle's mother and as someone with some professional experience.
I know we need to get you on the show again without being a professional, but Belle's mom. And then I can see you Belle talk. That would be
Yeah.
fascinating.
You can do some live family therapy on us if necessary.
I don't want to. That's crazy. I can't. I don't think that's ethical. No, I won't do it. We'll do it underneath the table, behind the scene. But it's
Okay.
lovely having you, and thank you, audience, for tuning in. And don't forget to subscribe to the show so more families can find the shows organically. We'll see you on the next episode. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you to everyone at home or on the go for listening. If you find this show helpful, please hit that follow or subscribe button. It does wonders for the show, so more people can find Teen Talk navigating teen challenging behavior organically. If you have any questions about anything we've talked about, please drop me a line at pei@teentalkpod.com. That is PEI-I@teentalkpod.com. I read every email I get. I read every email I get, whether that's an episode idea, a guest recommendation, or just a simple note about how the show has impacted you. I'd love to hear from you. I am Pei Yi, and I'll see you on the next episode.